Question 1. Performance analysis shows that a law enforcement officer responsible for reviewing concealed handgun permit applications in Maine has a close personal friend who is applying for a permit. The officer knows the friend well and believes them to be a responsible individual, but is aware that the friend has a minor, non-violent misdemeanor conviction from over 10 years ago that might, under a strict interpretation, raise a question during a standard review. How should the officer proceed to ensure compliance with Maine's concealed handgun permit regulations and ethical standards? Option A. Immediately recuse themselves from any involvement in the friend's permit application process and ensure it is handled by another qualified individual. Option B. Deny the permit based on the minor misdemeanor conviction to demonstrate an exceptionally rigorous and unbiased review process. Option C. Expedite the approval of the permit as a favor to a friend, assuming their past minor conviction is irrelevant given their current character. Option D. Proceed with the review, but be extra diligent in documenting every step to prove impartiality while still making the final decision. The correct answer is A. Immediately recuse themselves from any involvement in the friend's permit application process and ensure it is handled by another qualified individual. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the conflict between personal relationships and the impartial application of law, specifically concerning concealed handgun permits in Maine. The challenge lies in maintaining objectivity and upholding the integrity of the permitting process when a close personal connection is involved. Failure to do so could compromise public safety and erode trust in the legal system. Careful judgment is required to ensure that permit decisions are based solely on legal eligibility criteria and not influenced by personal bias or obligation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves recusing oneself from any part of the permit application process for a close friend. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the potential for bias and upholds the principle of impartiality mandated by Maine law regarding concealed handgun permits. Maine law, like most jurisdictions, requires permit applications to be reviewed based on objective criteria, such as criminal history, mental health status, and demonstrated competency. Allowing a personal relationship to influence this review would violate the spirit and letter of these regulations, potentially leading to the issuance of a permit to an individual who may not meet the legal requirements, thereby jeopardizing public safety. Recusal ensures that the decision-making process remains fair, unbiased, and compliant with all statutory requirements. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the application review, but attempt to be extra careful, not to let the friendship influence the decision. This is professionally unacceptable because even with the best intentions, unconscious bias can significantly impact judgment. The appearance of impropriety alone can undermine the integrity of the process. Furthermore, Maine law does not provide for a careful exception to conflict of interest rules. It requires avoidance of such situations. Another incorrect approach is to approve the permit quickly to do a favor for a friend, assuming they are law-abiding. This is a severe ethical and regulatory failure. It bypasses the mandatory background checks and competency assessments required by Maine statutes, directly violating the law and potentially placing a firearm in the hands of someone who has not met the legal standards for safe ownership and carrying. This action prioritizes personal convenience over public safety and legal compliance. A third incorrect approach is to deny the permit based on a minor, unrelated past infraction that would typically be overlooked for a stranger in an attempt to appear extra rigorous. While seemingly demonstrating rigor, this approach is also flawed. It deviates from consistent application of the law, treating the friend unfairly by applying a stricter standard than would be applied to others. This also compromises the integrity of the process by introducing a different form of bias and overcorrection for the perceived conflict. Professional reasoning. Professionals in positions of authority over permit application should adhere to a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and public safety. This framework includes 1. Identifying potential conflicts of interest, including personal relationships. 2. Understanding the specific legal requirements and regulations governing the decision-making process. 3. When a conflict is identified, immediately recusing oneself from any involvement in the matter. 4. Ensuring that all decisions are based solely on objective, legally defined criteria. 5. Documenting the recusal and the reasons for it. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are fair, unbiased, and legally sound, thereby protecting both the individual's rights and the public's safety. Question 2. The assessment process reveals an applicant for a concealed handgun permit in Maine has expressed a general feeling of unease in their community and a desire for personal protection, but appears visibly anxious during the interview. What is the most appropriate course of action for the permitting authority? Option A. Conduct a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's stated reasons for seeking the permit, seeking clarification on their specific concerns and any supporting information that demonstrates a proper purpose as defined by Maine law, while remaining professional and respectful of their demeanor. Option B. Grant the permit without further inquiry, accepting the applicant's statement of wanting personal protection as sufficient justification for a proper purpose. Option C. Question the applicant extensively about specific incidents of perceived threats or criminal activity in their neighborhood, even if they are unable to provide concrete details, to ascertain the severity of their concerns. Option D. Immediately deny the permit application due to the applicant's visible anxiety, interpreting it as a sign of instability or an inability to responsibly handle a firearm. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's stated reasons for seeking the permit, seeking clarification on their specific concerns, and any supporting information that demonstrates a proper purpose as defined by Maine law, while remaining professional and respectful of their demeanor. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent with the legal requirements for obtaining a concealed handgun permit in Maine. The challenge lies in discerning genuine self-defense needs from potential misuse or misinterpretation of the law, necessitating careful judgment to uphold public safety while respecting individual rights. The best professional approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the applicant's stated reasons for seeking a permit, cross-referencing them with the established criteria and any supporting documentation provided. This approach is correct because Maine law under Title 25, Chapter 101, Subchapter 1, Section 2001A, outlines the requirements for a permit, which include demonstrating a proper purpose. While the law does not explicitly define proper purpose in exhaustive detail, it implies a legitimate need for self-defense. An objective assessment ensures that the applicant's stated purpose aligns with the spirit and letter of the law, avoiding subjective biases. This process respects the applicant's rights while fulfilling the duty to ensure permits are issued responsibly. An approach that immediately denies the permit based solely on the applicant's perceived nervousness or a vague statement of feeling unsafe, without further inquiry, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the requirement of assessing a proper purpose, and instead relies on subjective interpretation and potential prejudice, which is not a basis for legal permit issuance or denial. Such an approach could lead to the wrongful denial of a permit to a law-abiding citizen who genuinely needs it for self-defense. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to grant the permit without any further investigation or clarification, simply because the applicant stated a desire for self-protection. This bypasses the legal requirement to assess the proper purpose and could potentially issue a permit to an individual who may not meet the underlying legal standards, thereby compromising public safety. Finally, an approach that involves pressuring the applicant to provide more specific, potentially incriminating details beyond what is legally required for a proper purpose is also unacceptable. This oversteps the bounds of the permit application process and could violate the applicant's privacy or rights, while not necessarily contributing to a more accurate assessment of their eligibility under Maine law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective evaluation against established legal criteria. This involves understanding the specific requirements of Maine's concealed handgun permit law, including the concept of proper purpose. When faced with ambiguity, the framework should guide professionals to seek clarification through further, appropriate questioning or documentation, rather than making assumptions or denials based on subjective impressions or by overstepping legal boundaries. The process must be fair, consistent, and grounded in the law. Question 3. Stakeholder feedback indicates that some concealed handgun permit holders in Maine have been approached by friends seeking assistance with their own permit applications. If you are a permit holder and a friend asks you to help them out with their concealed handgun permit application in Maine, citing your experience and knowledge, what is the most ethically sound and legally compliant course of action? Option A. Agree to contact someone you know within the permitting office to put in a good word for your friend, assuring them it will help their application. Option B. Offer to review their application before they submit it to ensure it is perfect and suggest ways to highlight their character to the issuing authority. Option C. Advise your friend to simply fill out the application as best they can and hope for the best, without offering any specific guidance or feedback. Option D. Politely explain that while you understand their request, the application process is governed by specific Maine statutes and regulations, and you cannot offer any special assistance or influence beyond what is publicly available to all applicants. Correct answer is D. Politely explain that while you understand their request, the application process is governed by specific Maine statutes and regulations, and you cannot offer any special assistance or influence beyond what is publicly available to all applicants. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing personal relationships with the strict legal and ethical obligations of a concealed handgun permit holder in Maine. The core of the challenge lies in upholding the integrity of the permitting process and ensuring public safety, even when faced with a personal request that could be perceived as a favor. Careful judgment is required to avoid any appearance of impropriety or undue influence. The best professional practice involves a direct and transparent approach that prioritizes adherence to Maine law and the principles of responsible firearm ownership. This means clearly communicating to the friend that the permit application process is a matter of public record and subject to specific legal requirements, and that personal relationships cannot influence or bypass these procedures. It involves politely but firmly declining to offer any special assistance or information beyond what is publicly available and legally permissible for any applicant. This approach is correct because it aligns with Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 251, which governs concealed handgun permits, emphasizing objective criteria for issuance and prohibiting favoritism. Ethically, it upholds the principle of fairness and equal treatment for all applicants, preventing any perception of corruption or abuse of privilege. An incorrect approach would be to offer to put in a good word, or to suggest that personal knowledge of the applicant might expedite their application. This is professionally unacceptable because it implies that personal connections can influence the outcome of a legal process designed to be objective. Such an action would violate the spirit, if not the letter, of Maine's concealed handgun permitting laws, which are designed to ensure that only qualified individuals receive permits based on established criteria, not personal relationships. It also creates an ethical conflict by leveraging a position of trust and responsibility for personal gain or to benefit a friend, potentially undermining public confidence in the permitting system. Another incorrect approach would be to provide the friend with specific details about the application process that are not readily available to the general public, or to offer advice that goes beyond general guidance. This is professionally unacceptable as it could be construed as providing an unfair advantage, thereby compromising the integrity of the application process. It also risks misinterpreting or misapplying legal requirements, which could lead to the friend's application being improperly handled or even denied, while also exposing the permit holder to potential scrutiny. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore the request and avoid the friend altogether. While this might seem like a way to avoid conflict, it is professionally inadequate because it fails to address the situation directly and ethically. It also misses an opportunity to educate the friend about the legal and ethical responsibilities associated with concealed handgun permits, potentially leaving them with a misunderstanding of the process and their obligations. Responsible permit holders should be prepared to address such situations with clarity and integrity. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the core legal and ethical obligations. 2. Assessing the request against these obligations. 3. Prioritizing adherence to the law and ethical principles over personal convenience or relationships. 4. Communicating clearly and respectfully, even when declining a request. 5. Seeking guidance from appropriate authorities if unsure about the proper course of action. Question 4. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a concealed handgun permit holder being involved in a situation requiring the use of their firearm, with a low impact on public safety if the situation is handled appropriately. You are in a public place in Maine when an individual begins to verbally threaten another person aggressively. The situation is tense, but no physical contact has been made, and the aggressor is not visibly armed. As a concealed handgun permit holder, what is the most responsible course of action? Option A. Immediately draw your concealed handgun and aim it at the aggressor to deter further verbal threats and assert control over the situation. Option B. Leave the area immediately without engaging or observing further, as your primary responsibility is your own safety. Option C. Intervene verbally and physically to stop the aggressor's behavior, using your concealed handgun as a visible deterrent if necessary. Option D. Observe the situation, remain calm, and be prepared to act only if the threat escalates to imminent death or serious bodily injury to yourself or another, while prioritizing de-escalation and disengagement if possible. Correct answer is D. Observe the situation, remain calm, and be prepared to act only if the threat escalates to imminent death or serious bodily injury to yourself or another, while prioritizing de-escalation and disengagement if possible. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a concealed handgun permit holder being involved in a situation requiring the use of their firearm, with a low impact on public safety if the situation is handled appropriately. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their legal right to carry a concealed handgun with the significant ethical responsibility to act with restraint and prioritize de-escalation and the safety of others. The decision-making process must be grounded in Maine law regarding the use of deadly force and the principles of responsible gun ownership. The best professional approach involves prioritizing de-escalation and avoiding the use of the firearm, unless absolutely necessary to prevent imminent death or serious bodily injury to oneself or another person. This aligns with Maine's legal standards for self-defense, which require a reasonable belief that such force is necessary. Ethically, responsible concealed carry demands that the firearm be a last resort, employed only when all other reasonable options have been exhausted and the threat is immediate and severe. This approach minimizes the risk of unintended consequences, legal repercussions, and harm to innocent bystanders. An approach that involves brandishing the firearm to intimidate or assert dominance, even in a tense situation, is professionally unacceptable. This action escalates the situation, increases the likelihood of a violent confrontation, and is not legally justified under Maine law unless the immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury is present. Furthermore, it violates the ethical obligation of a permit holder to act with discretion and prioritize public safety. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to immediately draw and aim the firearm at the first sign of conflict, without assessing the level of threat or attempting to disengage. This demonstrates a lack of judgment and an over-reliance on the firearm as a primary solution, rather than a last resort. It fails to meet the legal threshold for the use of deadly force and carries significant ethical implications regarding the preservation of life and the avoidance of unnecessary violence. Finally, an approach that involves fleeing the scene without attempting to de-escalate or assess the situation, even if the permit holder feels threatened, may be professionally problematic if there is a reasonable opportunity to ensure safety through non-violent means, or if inaction could lead to greater harm to others. While self-preservation is paramount, the decision to carry a concealed weapon implies a willingness to act responsibly in certain circumstances, and a complete abdication of responsibility without due consideration can be ethically questionable. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes situational awareness, threat assessment, and the legal and ethical principles governing the use of force. This includes understanding when de-escalation is possible, when to disengage, and when the use of deadly force is legally and ethically permissible. The primary goal should always be to resolve the situation with the least amount of force necessary, prioritizing the safety of all involved. Question 5. Operational review demonstrates that a Maine law enforcement officer, who is also an authorized official responsible for reviewing and approving concealed handgun permit applications, has a close personal friendship with an individual who is applying for a concealed handgun permit. The officer is aware of this personal relationship. What is the most ethically sound and legally compliant course of action for the officer? Option A. Proceed with the permit application review as usual, assuming the personal friendship will not influence their professional judgment. Option B. Delegate the review and approval of the application to a subordinate officer while maintaining indirect oversight. Option C. Advise the applicant on specific aspects of the application process that would likely lead to approval, utilizing knowledge of the system gained through their position. Option D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the appropriate superior officer or designated authority, and recuse themselves from any involvement in the review or approval of the applicant's permit. The correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to the appropriate superior officer or designated authority, and recuse themselves from any involvement in the review or approval of the applicant's permit. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a direct conflict between a personal relationship and the legal requirements for obtaining a concealed handgun permit in Maine. The applicant's close personal relationship with the issuing officer creates a significant appearance of impropriety, potentially undermining public trust in the fairness and impartiality of the permitting process. Maintaining the integrity of the permitting system requires strict adherence to established procedures and a clear separation between personal connections and official duties. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach is to immediately disclose the personal relationship to the issuing authority and recuse oneself from any direct involvement in the applicant's permit review. This approach upholds the ethical principle of avoiding conflicts of interest and ensures that the applicant's permit is evaluated solely on its merits, free from any perceived bias. Maine law, while not explicitly detailing this exact scenario, operates under a framework that prioritizes public trust and the fair administration of laws. Disclosing and recusing demonstrates a commitment to these principles, preventing any appearance of favoritism or undue influence. This aligns with the general ethical obligations of public officials to act impartially and avoid situations that could compromise their integrity or the integrity of the office they hold. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the permit application without disclosing the relationship, assuming the personal friendship will not influence the outcome. This fails to address the appearance of impropriety, which is as damaging to public trust as actual bias, violates the ethical duty to avoid conflicts of interest, and could lead to accusations of favoritism, even if no actual favoritism occurred. Another incorrect approach is to ask a subordinate officer to process the application to avoid direct involvement, while still retaining oversight. While this attempts to create some distance, it does not fully resolve the conflict. The issuing officer still has a personal connection to the applicant and the outcome of the application. This approach does not fully remove the potential for perceived or actual influence and fails to achieve the necessary level of impartiality. A third incorrect approach is to advise the applicant on how to navigate the process to ensure approval, leveraging the personal relationship. This is a direct violation of ethical conduct and potentially illegal. It constitutes an abuse of power and undermines the integrity of the concealed handgun permitting system by prioritizing personal connections over legal qualifications and public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such dilemmas should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes transparency, impartiality, and adherence to legal and ethical standards. This involves identifying potential conflicts of interest, understanding the relevant legal framework and ethical guidelines, and choosing the course of action that best preserves the integrity of the process and public trust. When a personal relationship could influence official duties, the default professional response should be to disclose the relationship and recuse oneself from any decision-making capacity related to the individual involved. Question 6. Quality control measures reveal that a friend who knows you hold a concealed handgun permit in Maine has asked for your assistance in obtaining their own permit. They are struggling with the application process and have asked if you could put in a good word for them with the licensing authority, or if you could lend them a firearm to use for their permit application. How should you respond to this request? Option A. Agree to lend them a firearm to use for their permit application, assuring them it's a temporary measure. Option B. Politely decline to assist in any way that could influence the application process or involve lending a firearm, explaining that the process requires individual adherence to legal requirements and that you cannot compromise your responsibilities as a permit holder. Option C. Offer to help them fill out the application form, using your knowledge of the process to ensure it's completed correctly. Option D. Offer to contact the licensing authority on their behalf to put in a good word and explain their situation. Correct answer is B. Politely decline to assist in any way that could influence the application process or involve lending a firearm, explaining that the process requires individual adherence to legal requirements and that you cannot compromise your responsibilities as a permit holder. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing personal relationships with the strict legal and ethical obligations of a concealed handgun permit holder in Maine. The core conflict lies in the potential for a personal favor to inadvertently compromise the applicant's eligibility or the permit holder's responsibility. Careful judgment is required to ensure that no action taken, even with good intentions, violates Maine law or ethical standards for firearm possession. The correct approach involves politely but firmly declining to assist in a manner that could be construed as facilitating the permit process or circumventing legal requirements. This is correct because Maine law, like most jurisdictions, emphasizes individual responsibility and prohibits aiding or abetting in the illegal acquisition or possession of firearms. Specifically, Maine Revised Statutes Title 17A, Chapter 11, Section 1051, addresses the unlawful furnishing of a firearm, and while this scenario doesn't directly involve furnishing, the spirit of the law is to prevent individuals from improperly influencing or assisting others in obtaining permits or firearms. Ethically, a permit holder has a duty to uphold the integrity of the permitting system and to act responsibly, which includes avoiding situations that could create even the appearance of impropriety or a violation of law. An incorrect approach would be to offer to put in a good word for the applicant with the licensing authority. This is ethically and regulatorily flawed because it suggests leveraging personal connections to influence a decision that should be based solely on objective legal criteria. It could be interpreted as an attempt to improperly influence the permitting process, potentially violating the spirit, if not the letter, of laws designed to ensure objective eligibility. Furthermore, it places the permit holder in a position of vouching for someone without full knowledge of their eligibility, which is a breach of responsible firearm ownership. Another incorrect approach would be to offer to lend the applicant a firearm for the permit application process, even if the applicant intends to purchase their own later. This is problematic because Maine law has specific regulations regarding the transfer and use of firearms, and lending a firearm for the purpose of a permit application without proper background checks or adherence to transfer laws could be a violation. It also bypasses the applicant's responsibility to demonstrate their own proficiency and eligibility with a firearm they intend to possess legally. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to agree to help the applicant fill out the application form, even if the permit holder is knowledgeable about the process. While seemingly helpful, this could inadvertently lead to the permit holder providing information or advice that is not entirely accurate or that could be misconstrued as providing legal or expert guidance, which they are not authorized to do. The responsibility for accurately completing the application rests solely with the applicant. The professional reasoning process for situations like this should involve a clear understanding of one's legal obligations as a permit holder and a commitment to ethical conduct. Professionals should first identify any potential conflicts between personal relationships and their legal/ethical duties. They should then consult relevant statutes and regulations to understand the boundaries of acceptable behavior. When in doubt, erring on the side of caution and declining to engage in activities that could be perceived as improper is the safest and most ethical course of action. Maintaining professional integrity and upholding the integrity of the permitting system should always be prioritized over personal favors. Question 7. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a Maine concealed handgun permit applicant has a history of associating with individuals previously convicted of drug offenses, though the applicant themselves has no criminal record and has not been adjudicated as having a mental condition that would prohibit firearm possession under Maine law. What is the most appropriate course of action for the permitting authority? Option A. Postpone the decision indefinitely to allow for further informal investigation into the applicant's past associations. Option B. Deny the permit based on the applicant's association with individuals involved in criminal activity, as this suggests a potential risk to public safety. Option C. Request extensive personal background information on the applicant's family and social circle to further investigate their associations before making a decision. Option D. Issue the concealed handgun permit if the applicant meets all statutory requirements for eligibility under Maine law, as past associations without personal conviction or disqualifying adjudication are not grounds for denial. The correct answer is D. Issue the concealed handgun permit if the applicant meets all statutory requirements for eligibility under Maine law, as past associations without personal conviction or disqualifying adjudication are not grounds for denial. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's right to privacy and the legal requirements for permit issuance with the potential need to ensure public safety. The applicant's past behavior, while not resulting in a conviction, raises a red flag that necessitates careful consideration without resorting to arbitrary denial. Judgment is required to distinguish between information that is relevant to permit eligibility and information that is merely personal or potentially discriminatory. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the applicant's submission against the specific criteria outlined in Maine's concealed handgun permit statutes. This approach prioritizes adherence to the law, ensuring that any decision is based on objective legal standards rather than subjective assumptions or biases. Specifically, Maine Law 37 MRS, Section 4004, outlines the grounds for denial, which are primarily related to criminal convictions, certain mental health adjudications, or being prohibited from possessing firearms under federal law. If the applicant's past behavior, as described, does not meet any of these statutory disqualifiers, then the permit must be issued. This approach upholds due process and prevents the arbitrary denial of a constitutional right. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to deny the permit based solely on the applicant's past association with individuals involved in illegal activities, even if the applicant themselves was not convicted. Maine law does not permit denial based on mere association. This approach oversteps the statutory grounds for denial and infringes upon the applicant's rights. Another incorrect approach is to request additional, irrelevant personal information from the applicant that is not related to the statutory requirements for permit issuance. This could include details about their personal relationships, financial history beyond what is legally required for background checks, or other private matters. Such a request would violate the applicant's privacy and exceed the scope of the concealed handgun permit application process as defined by Maine law. A third incorrect approach is to delay the decision indefinitely without a valid legal basis, hoping the applicant will withdraw their application. Maine law mandates a timely review of applications. Unreasonable delays without statutory justification are a failure to follow the prescribed administrative process and can be considered an arbitrary denial. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a structured decision-making process. First, they must identify the specific legal requirements for issuing a concealed handgun permit in Maine, consulting the relevant statutes, e.g. 37 MRS, Section 4004. Second, they must objectively assess the applicant's submitted information against these legal criteria, focusing on whether any statutory disqualifiers are present. Third, if the applicant meets all legal requirements, the permit must be issued. If there are grounds for denial, these must be clearly articulated and directly tied to specific statutory provisions, with a clear explanation of the process for appeal. The principle of innocent until proven guilty and the presumption of eligibility, unless a statutory disqualifier is met, are paramount. Question 8. Benchmark analysis indicates a Maine resident who holds a valid concealed handgun permit is approached by a close friend who is applying for their own permit. The friend is struggling with the application form and asks the permit holder to help them out by filling in some of the details and vouching for their character, as the friend believes they know the permit holder well enough to do so. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the permit holder? Option A. Agree to fill out the application for the friend, as they are close friends, and the permit holder believes they know the friend's character well enough to accurately represent them. Option B. Politely explain to the friend that while they are happy to offer general advice on the application process, they cannot fill out any part of the application or vouch for information they do not personally and directly know to be true, as this would violate Maine's concealed handgun permit laws. Option C. Advise the friend to omit any information on the application that they feel might be problematic or that they are unsure about, suggesting that less information is better. Option D. Offer to sign the application as a character reference without reading it thoroughly, assuming the friend has completed it truthfully. The correct answer is B. Politely explain to the friend that while they are happy to offer general advice on the application process, they cannot fill out any part of the application or vouch for information they do not personally and directly know to be true, as this would violate Maine's concealed handgun permit laws. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a direct conflict between a personal relationship and the legal requirements for obtaining a concealed handgun permit in Maine. The applicant's desire to assist a friend, coupled with the friend's potential misunderstanding of the application process, creates an ethical tightrope. A permit holder has a responsibility to uphold the integrity of the application process and ensure all information provided is truthful and accurate, as mandated by Maine law. Failure to do so can have serious legal consequences for both the applicant and the permit holder. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves politely but firmly declining to provide assistance that would involve misrepresenting information on the application. This aligns with the ethical obligation to be truthful and uphold the law. Maine law, specifically concerning the application for a concealed handgun permit, requires applicants to provide accurate and truthful information. Assisting a friend by filling out parts of their application or vouching for information that is not personally known to be true would constitute aiding in the submission of potentially false information, which is a violation of the spirit and letter of Maine's firearm laws. The permit holder's duty is to ensure their own compliance and not to facilitate another's noncompliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. Providing false information on the application, even with good intentions to help a friend, is a direct violation of Maine's concealed handgun permit application requirements, which mandate truthfulness. This could lead to the denial of the permit, revocation if already issued, and potential criminal charges for making a false statement. Agreeing to fill out the application for the friend, even if the friend is present, blurs the lines of responsibility and could be construed as the permit holder making representations on behalf of the applicant that they cannot legally or ethically make without direct personal knowledge of every detail. This also circumvents the applicant's personal responsibility to truthfully complete their own application. Suggesting the friend omit information, even if they believe it is minor, is also a violation of the truthfulness requirement and could be seen as advising the friend on how to circumvent legal requirements, which is unethical and potentially illegal. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any field, especially those involving regulated activities like firearm permits, must prioritize legal compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with a situation where a personal relationship might influence professional judgment, it is crucial to create a clear boundary. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the core legal and ethical obligations, e.g., truthfulness in applications, upholding the law. 2. Recognizing potential conflicts of interest or pressures to bend rules. 3. Consulting relevant statutes and regulations, in this case, Maine's concealed handgun permit laws. 4. Communicating clearly and professionally, even if it means declining a request that could lead to a violation. 5. Prioritizing integrity and adherence to the law above personal convenience or loyalty. Question 9. Governance review demonstrates that a Maine concealed handgun permit applicant is a very close personal friend of a law enforcement officer responsible for reviewing permit applications. The applicant meets all the objective statutory requirements for obtaining a permit. What is the most ethically sound and legally defensible course of action for the officer? Option A. Approve the permit application because the friend meets all objective legal criteria and the personal relationship is irrelevant to the legal qualifications. Option B. Deny the permit application due to the personal relationship, even though the applicant meets all objective legal requirements. Option C. Recuse themselves from any involvement in the review and decision-making process for this specific permit application. Option D. Approve the permit application, and then inform their supervisor of the personal relationship after the decision has been made. The correct answer is C. Recuse themselves from any involvement in the review and decision-making process for this specific permit application. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict between a personal relationship and the objective application of concealed handgun permit laws in Maine. Maintaining public trust and ensuring fair, impartial enforcement of the law are paramount. Permit holders' perceived or actual favoritism can undermine the integrity of the permitting process and erode confidence in law enforcement. Careful judgment is required to navigate the personal connection while upholding legal and ethical obligations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves recusing oneself from any decision-making process directly related to the permit application or renewal of a close personal friend. This approach upholds the principle of impartiality and avoids any appearance of impropriety. Maine law, while not explicitly detailing recusal for personal relationships in permit applications, operates under a broader framework of ethical conduct for law enforcement and public officials, which mandates avoiding conflicts of interest and maintaining public trust. By stepping aside, the individual ensures that the application is reviewed and decided upon without any personal bias, adhering to the spirit and intent of fair legal administration. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with reviewing and approving the permit application because the friend meets all the objective legal criteria. This fails to recognize the ethical imperative to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest. While the friend may legally qualify, the personal relationship creates a situation where others might perceive the decision as influenced, thereby damaging public trust. Another incorrect approach is to approve the permit, but then disclose the personal relationship to a supervisor after the fact. This is insufficient because it does not prevent the initial conflict of interest. Disclosure after the fact does not rectify the potential for bias during the decision-making process and still leaves room for perceptions of favoritism. A further incorrect approach is to deny the permit based solely on the personal relationship, without any objective legal grounds for denial. This is a clear violation of the law, as permits must be granted if the applicant meets the statutory requirements. Such an action would be arbitrary and capricious, leading to legal challenges and a severe breach of professional ethics. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes impartiality and adherence to both the letter and spirit of the law. This involves 1. Identifying potential conflicts of interest, including personal relationships that could influence judgment. 2. Consulting relevant ethical guidelines and legal statutes, even if they do not explicitly cover the specific scenario. 3. Prioritizing recusal from any decision-making process where a conflict exists or could be perceived. 4. Documenting any recusal and the reasons for it. 5. Seeking guidance from supervisors or legal counsel when in doubt. The ultimate goal is to ensure that all actions are transparent, fair, and uphold the integrity of the governing body and its processes. Question 10. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a Maine resident is considering applying for a concealed handgun permit. The application fee is $65. Required pre-application training costs $150. The applicant estimates the cost of a suitable handgun at $400 and a box of 50 rounds of ammunition at $25. They anticipate needing 4 boxes of ammunition per year for practice. The permit is valid for 4 years, after which renewal costs $65. The applicant believes the primary benefit is enhanced personal safety, which they value at $100 per year. What is the net financial outcome for the applicant over the first 4 years of permit ownership, assuming they proceed with the application? Option A, a net financial cost of $1,015. Option B, a net financial cost of $1,215. Option C, a net financial benefit of $100. Option D, a net financial cost of $715. The correct answer is B, a net financial cost of $1,215. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine concealed handgun permit applicant by requiring them to balance the financial implications of permit acquisition against the potential benefits and costs associated with responsible firearm ownership and the legal requirements of the state. The applicant must make a reasoned decision based on a quantitative assessment, demonstrating an understanding of both personal financial management and the practicalities of obtaining and maintaining a concealed handgun permit in Maine. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough cost-benefit analysis that accurately quantifies all direct and indirect costs associated with obtaining and maintaining a concealed handgun permit in Maine, including the permit application fee, required training costs, firearm purchase, ammunition, secure storage, and potential annual renewal fees. This analysis must then be weighed against the perceived benefits, such as personal safety and the legal right to carry. The applicant should only proceed if the quantifiable benefits demonstrably outweigh the quantifiable costs, aligning with responsible financial planning and a commitment to meeting all legal obligations under Maine law. This approach ensures a decision is made based on objective data and a clear understanding of financial commitment, which is ethically sound and practically prudent. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves focusing solely on the initial permit application fee without considering the ongoing costs and the investment in a firearm. This fails to account for the full financial commitment required by Maine law and responsible ownership, potentially leading to an inability to afford necessary renewals or ongoing training, thus violating the spirit of responsible permit acquisition. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize the perceived immediate benefit of personal safety above all else, neglecting a detailed financial assessment. While personal safety is a primary motivator for seeking a permit, Maine law expects applicants to be able to meet the financial obligations associated with the permit and firearm ownership. Ignoring these costs can lead to financial strain and potentially noncompliance with renewal requirements, which is ethically and legally problematic. A third incorrect approach is to base the decision on anecdotal evidence or the experiences of others without conducting a personal, quantifiable analysis. This lacks the rigor required for a sound financial and personal decision, potentially leading to an uninformed choice that does not align with the applicant's specific financial situation or the precise requirements of Maine's concealed handgun permit regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such decisions using a structured, data-driven methodology. This involves clearly defining the objective, obtaining a concealed handgun permit, identifying all relevant costs, direct and indirect, one-time and recurring, quantifying these costs, identifying and qualitatively assessing benefits, and then comparing the two. This systematic process, grounded in financial prudence and adherence to legal requirements, ensures that decisions are informed, responsible, and sustainable. Question 11. Implementation of the concealed handgun permit application review process in Maine requires careful consideration of applicant suitability. A permit officer is reviewing an application and notes that the applicant has a history of minor, nonviolent misdemeanor convictions from over a decade ago and has completed a certified firearms safety course. The officer is aware that Maine law outlines specific disqualifying factors for concealed handgun permits. Which of the following actions best upholds the legal and ethical responsibilities of the permit officer in Maine? Option A. Issue the permit based on the applicant's completion of the safety course and the age of the misdemeanor convictions, assuming they are no longer disqualifying without further investigation. Option B. Rely solely on the applicant's statement of good moral character provided in the application, without independently verifying their criminal or mental health history. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's criminal history and mental health records, as required by Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 251, to determine if any disqualifying factors are present, in addition to verifying the firearm safety training. Option D. Deny the permit immediately due to the presence of any criminal convictions, regardless of their nature or age, as a strict interpretation of public safety. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's criminal history and mental health records, as required by Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 251, to determine if any disqualifying factors are present, in addition to verifying the firearms safety training. Explanation. Implementation of concealed handgun permit requirements in Maine presents a professionally challenging scenario due to the inherent responsibility of ensuring public safety while upholding individual rights. The challenge lies in accurately assessing an applicant's suitability based on Maine's specific legal framework, which balances these competing interests. Careful judgment is required to interpret statutes and administrative rules, ensuring that only qualified individuals receive permits, thereby minimizing risks to the community. The best approach involves a thorough review of the applicant's submitted documentation against the criteria outlined in Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 251, specifically focusing on the definitions and disqualifying factors for a concealed handgun permit. This includes verifying residency, age, completion of required safety training, and a comprehensive check for any disqualifying criminal convictions or mental health adjudications as stipulated by Maine law. This method is correct because it directly adheres to the statutory requirements for permit issuance, ensuring that the decision is based on objective legal criteria and established public safety protocols. It prioritizes compliance with the law, which is the fundamental ethical and legal obligation of the permitting authority. An approach that relies solely on the applicant's self-attestation of good moral character, without independent verification of disqualifying factors, would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the statutory requirement for a thorough assessment and could lead to the issuance of a permit to an individual who poses a risk, violating the public safety mandate. Similarly, an approach that prioritizes expediency over thoroughness, such as issuing a permit based on a cursory review of the application, ignores the detailed requirements of Maine law and the potential consequences of an improper issuance. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the legal and ethical duty to protect the public. Furthermore, an approach that dismisses concerns raised by law enforcement or other agencies without a proper legal basis for doing so would also be unacceptable, as it bypasses established channels for identifying potential risks and fails to engage with relevant information that could impact public safety. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing statutes and administrative rules. This framework involves systematically evaluating each piece of applicant information against these legal requirements. When ambiguities arise or potential disqualifying factors are identified, professionals must consult relevant legal counsel or supervisory guidance to ensure decisions are legally sound and ethically defensible. The process should be documented meticulously, demonstrating that all statutory obligations have been met. Question 12. To address the challenge of accurately completing a concealed handgun permit application in Maine, an applicant has gathered several documents. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with Maine's concealed handgun permit requirements? Option A. Omitting any mention of a minor shoplifting conviction from 5 years ago, assuming it is too old and minor to affect the application. Option B. Providing a training certificate from an online firearms enthusiast forum that claims to offer comprehensive safety knowledge, even though it is not officially recognized by any state agency. Option C. Presenting a letter from a former employer stating the applicant is a responsible individual as a substitute for formal handgun safety training. Option D. Submitting a completed application form along with a certificate of completion for a handgun safety course that was provided by a Maine Criminal Justice Academy certified instructor and covered all topics mandated by Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Section 2001A. The correct answer is D. Submitting a completed application form along with a certificate of completion for a handgun safety course that was provided by a Maine Criminal Justice Academy certified instructor and covered all topics mandated by Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Section 2001A. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate a thorough understanding of Maine's concealed handgun permit requirements, specifically concerning the application process and the types of documentation that are permissible. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting information on the application can lead to denial of the permit, potential legal repercussions, and a loss of trust in the applicant's ability to responsibly handle firearms. The challenge lies in navigating the specific statutory language and administrative rules of Maine to ensure full compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves the applicant accurately and truthfully completing the application form, providing all required documentation as specified by Maine law, and ensuring that any supporting documents, such as proof of training, are from a recognized and approved provider as outlined in Maine statutes. This approach is correct because Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 101, Subchapter 1, specifically Section 2001A, details the requirements for obtaining a concealed handgun permit, including the necessity of a completed application and proof of handgun safety training. Adhering strictly to these statutory requirements ensures the applicant meets the legal threshold for permit issuance and demonstrates responsible engagement with the permitting process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves submitting a training certificate from an informal, unapproved online course that does not meet the specific criteria for handgun safety training mandated by Maine law. This is incorrect because Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Section 2001A2, requires that the training be conducted by a certified instructor and cover specific topics. An unapproved course, regardless of its perceived quality, fails to meet this statutory mandate, rendering the documentation invalid for permit application purposes. Another incorrect approach is to omit truthful disclosure of a past misdemeanor conviction that is relevant to firearm possession, believing it might not be discovered or is insignificant. This is incorrect because Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Section 2001A, 1A, Roman 2 requires applicants to disclose any criminal history, and failure to do so constitutes a material misrepresentation on the application. Such omissions can lead to permit denial and potential criminal charges for providing false information. A further incorrect approach is to submit a notarized affidavit from a friend attesting to the applicant's proficiency with firearms in lieu of formal training. This is incorrect because Maine law explicitly requires documented handgun safety training from an approved source, as stipulated in Section 2001A, 2A. Personal attestations, even if notarized, do not satisfy the statutory requirement for formal, certified training. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a systematic approach. First, thoroughly review the specific statutory requirements of Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 101, Subchapter 1, regarding concealed handgun permits. Second, identify all mandatory documentation and information required by the law. Third, ensure all submitted materials are authentic, accurate, and directly comply with the statutory definitions and requirements, particularly concerning training and disclosure of personal history. When in doubt about the validity or sufficiency of any document or information, consult the relevant Maine statutes or seek clarification from the issuing authority before submitting the application. Question 13. The review process indicates that a Maine resident's concealed handgun permit is due to expire in approximately 4 months. The resident vaguely recalls being told the renewal process should begin a few months before it expires, but has not confirmed the exact statutory timeframe or initiated any steps. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for this permit holder? Option A. Assume that submitting the renewal application on the exact expiration date will be sufficient to maintain legal carrying privileges. Option B. Immediately verify the precise statutory renewal window and initiate the permit renewal process as soon as legally permissible, well in advance of the expiration date. Option C. Begin gathering personal documents that might be needed for renewal, but defer submitting the application until the permit is closer to expiring. Option D. Wait until the permit is within 1 month of expiring before beginning the renewal process to avoid any potential administrative delays associated with early submission. The correct answer is B. Immediately verify the precise statutory renewal window and initiate the permit renewal process as soon as legally permissible, well in advance of the expiration date. Explanation. The review process indicates a common challenge for individuals seeking concealed handgun permits in Maine, navigating the nuances of permit renewal requirements and the potential for delays. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a proactive understanding of legal obligations and a commitment to timely action to avoid lapses in legal carrying privileges. The applicant's reliance on a vague recollection of the renewal window, coupled with a lack of direct confirmation, creates a risk of noncompliance. Careful judgment is required to prioritize accurate information gathering and adhere strictly to statutory timelines. The best professional approach involves proactively confirming the exact renewal deadline and initiating the renewal process well in advance of the permit's expiration. This demonstrates a commitment to responsible gun ownership and adherence to Maine law. Specifically, Maine law requires permit holders to apply for renewal no earlier than 90 days before the permit expires and no later than the expiration date. By initiating the process early, the applicant ensures sufficient time for the Department of Public Safety to process the application and for the applicant to receive a renewed permit before the old one expires, thus avoiding any period of unlawful carrying. This proactive stance aligns with the ethical responsibility of permit holders to maintain legal compliance. An incorrect approach involves assuming the renewal window is flexible or can be addressed at the last minute, relying on a general understanding of a few months before, without verifying the precise statutory timeframe, is a regulatory failure. This could lead to the permit expiring before the renewal application is submitted or processed, resulting in a period of unlawful carrying, which carries significant legal penalties in Maine. Another incorrect approach is to wait until the permit has already expired to begin the renewal process. This is a direct violation of Maine law, as carrying a concealed handgun with an expired permit is illegal. The law is clear on the timing of renewal applications, and allowing a permit to lapse before seeking renewal is a serious oversight. A further incorrect approach is to assume that simply submitting an application on the expiration date will suffice. While the law allows application up to the expiration date, processing times can vary, and there is no guarantee of receiving the renewed permit by that exact date. This approach risks a gap in legal carrying privileges and demonstrates a lack of foresight regarding administrative processes. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and adhering to specific legal requirements. This involves 1. Identifying the relevant legal framework, Maine concealed handgun permit laws. 2. Ascertaining the precise requirements for renewal, including deadlines and necessary documentation. 3. Proactively gathering information and initiating the process with ample time to spare, accounting for potential administrative delays. 4. Maintaining records of application submissions and renewal dates. Question 14. Examination of the data shows a Maine resident is completing an application for a concealed handgun permit and has a past arrest that did not result in a conviction and believes the record has been expunged. What is the most appropriate approach to accurately fulfill the application requirements? Option A. Only disclose arrests that resulted in a conviction, as minor or expunged matters are not relevant. Option B. Provide a brief, generalized statement about having had minor legal issues in the past without detailing the specific arrest. Option C. Disclose the past arrest and any related details, even if no conviction resulted and the record is believed to be expunged. Option D. Omit the past arrest from the application, as it did not lead to a conviction and is believed to be expunged. The correct answer is C. Disclose the past arrest and any related details, even if no conviction resulted and the record is believed to be expunged. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine resident applying for a concealed handgun permit. The challenge lies in accurately and truthfully representing one's background to the licensing authority, specifically concerning past legal encounters. Failure to disclose relevant information, even if perceived as minor or resolved, can have significant consequences, including permit denial and potential legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to understand the scope of disclosure obligations under Maine law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and honest disclosure of all relevant information requested on the application, including any past arrests, charges, or convictions, regardless of whether they resulted in a conviction or were expunged. This approach aligns with the principle of candor towards the licensing authority and the specific requirements of Maine's concealed handgun permit application process. Maine law requires applicants to answer all questions truthfully and completely. Even if an arrest did not lead to a conviction, or if a record was sealed or expunged, the application may still require disclosure of the event itself. This ensures the licensing authority has a complete picture to assess an applicant's suitability. Incorrect approaches analysis. Providing incomplete information by omitting past arrests that did not result in a conviction is a regulatory failure. Maine law mandates disclosure of all arrests, not just convictions. This omission misleads the licensing authority and violates the requirement for truthful and complete answers. Failing to disclose a past arrest because the applicant believes it was minor or resolved without a conviction is an ethical and regulatory failure. The applicant is making a subjective judgment about what is relevant, which is the role of the licensing authority, not the applicant. This approach undermines the integrity of the application process. Withholding information about a past arrest because the applicant believes the record has been expunged is a significant regulatory failure. While expungement may remove a record from public view, it does not necessarily absolve an applicant from disclosing the underlying event on a permit application, depending on the specific wording of the application questions and Maine statutes governing such disclosures. The licensing authority may have independent means of accessing or requiring disclosure of such information. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a when in doubt, disclose mentality. The primary decision-making framework involves carefully reading and understanding every question on the application. If a question asks about arrests, charges, or legal encounters, and the applicant has any such history, it should be disclosed. Consulting the relevant Maine statutes and regulations pertaining to concealed handgun permits and the specific application form's instructions is crucial. If there is any ambiguity, seeking clarification from the issuing authority or legal counsel specializing in firearms law is advisable, rather than making assumptions that could lead to a regulatory violation. Question 15. Upon reviewing the application for a concealed handgun permit in Maine, a resident recalls a past incident where they were arrested for a minor offense, but the charges were subsequently dismissed by the court. Considering the application requires disclosure of any interactions with law enforcement, what is the most prudent course of action for the applicant? Option A. Omit the incident from the application, assuming their dismissed charge is not relevant to permit eligibility. Option B. Fully disclose the arrest and the dismissal of charges, providing a brief, factual explanation of the circumstances. Option C. Contact the Maine State Police to ask if the dismissed charge needs to be reported before submitting the application. Option D. Disclose the arrest but refrain from mentioning the dismissal or providing any context, leaving it to the authorities to investigate further. The correct answer is B. Fully disclose the arrest and the dismissal of charges, providing a brief, factual explanation of the circumstances. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine resident applying for a concealed handgun permit because it involves navigating the specific requirements and potential disqualifications outlined in Maine law. The applicant's past interactions with law enforcement, even if not resulting in a conviction, could be interpreted by the permitting authority as indicative of a character or temperament that might pose a risk. Careful judgment is required to ensure all information provided is accurate and to understand how past events might be perceived under the relevant statutes. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to fully and accurately disclose all past interactions with law enforcement, regardless of the outcome, and to provide context or explanation where appropriate. This approach aligns with Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 251, which governs concealed handgun permits. Specifically, the law requires applicants to provide truthful and complete information on their applications, while the statute outlines disqualifying factors, e.g., felony convictions, certain misdemeanors. It also empowers the permitting authority to consider the totality of circumstances. By proactively disclosing and explaining past events, the applicant demonstrates honesty and allows the permitting authority to make an informed decision based on all available information, rather than discovering undisclosed information later, which could lead to denial or revocation. This approach fosters transparency and respects the regulatory process. Incorrect approach is analysis. Providing incomplete information by omitting the arrest and subsequent dismissal of charges is a significant regulatory failure. Maine law mandates truthful and complete disclosure on permit applications. Failing to mention this interaction, even if the charges were dropped, could be construed as an attempt to conceal relevant information, which is grounds for denial or revocation of a permit. Furthermore, assuming that a dismissed charge means the event is irrelevant to the permitting authority is a misinterpretation of the law. The authority has the discretion to consider such events in their assessment of an applicant's suitability. Another incorrect approach would be to only disclose the arrest but not offer any explanation or context. While technically disclosing the event, this lack of context might lead the permitting authority to make assumptions or require further investigation, potentially delaying the process or leading to an unfavorable outcome due to a lack of understanding of the circumstances. Finally, attempting to contact the permitting authority to inquire about whether the dismissed charge needs to be disclosed without first consulting the application instructions and relevant statutes is an inefficient and potentially misdirected approach. The application itself and the statutes provide the framework for disclosure requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should first thoroughly review the specific application form and the relevant state statutes governing the permit or license. They should err on the side of full disclosure, providing all requested information and any additional context that might clarify past events. If unsure about the disclosure requirements for a particular event, it is advisable to seek clarification directly from the issuing authority or legal counsel specializing in firearms law, rather than making assumptions. The overarching principle is transparency and adherence to the letter and spirit of the law. Question 16. When evaluating the requirements for obtaining a concealed handgun permit in Maine, an applicant with a past misdemeanor conviction for petty theft from 5 years ago is completing the application. What is the most appropriate course of action for this applicant to ensure compliance with Maine's concealed handgun permit regulations? Option A. Independently determine that the misdemeanor conviction is not disqualifying based on their understanding of Maine law and proceed with the application without mentioning it. Option B. Omit the misdemeanor conviction from the application, assuming it is minor and unlikely to affect eligibility. Option C. Fully and truthfully disclose the misdemeanor conviction on the application and provide any requested supporting documentation or explanation to the licensing authority. Option D. Contact the local police department informally to ask if the misdemeanor conviction will prevent them from getting a permit before submitting the application. Correct answer is C. Fully and truthfully disclose the misdemeanor conviction on the application and provide any requested supporting documentation or explanation to the licensing authority. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate the nuances of Maine's concealed handgun permit laws, specifically concerning the definition of eligible and the potential impact of past legal entanglements. The applicant's desire to obtain a permit, coupled with a past misdemeanor conviction that might be interpreted differently by various authorities, necessitates a thorough and honest approach to the application process. Misrepresenting information or withholding relevant details can lead to permit denial, revocation, and potential legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the applicant proactively and truthfully disclosing all relevant information on the Maine concealed handgun permit application, including the past misdemeanor conviction, and providing any supporting documentation or explanation as requested by the licensing authority. This aligns with Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 251, which outlines the requirements for obtaining a concealed handgun permit. Specifically, the law requires applicants to provide truthful and complete information. By disclosing the conviction, the applicant demonstrates honesty and allows the licensing authority to make an informed decision based on the specific criteria outlined in the statute, which may include a review of the nature of the offense and the time elapsed since its disposition. This approach respects the regulatory framework and fosters transparency. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to omit the misdemeanor conviction from the application, assuming it is minor or irrelevant. This directly violates the requirement for truthful and complete disclosure mandated by Maine law. Failure to disclose can be grounds for denial or revocation of a permit, even if the underlying offense might not have disqualified the applicant had it been disclosed. Another incorrect approach is to contact the issuing authority informally to inquire about the conviction's impact without submitting a formal application. While seeking clarification is not inherently wrong, relying solely on informal advice without proper documentation and a formal application process is insufficient. The licensing authority needs the full context provided by the application to make an official determination. A third incorrect approach is to interpret the law independently and decide the conviction is not disqualifying without consulting the licensing authority or providing it for their review. This bypasses the established process and assumes a level of legal expertise that the applicant may not possess, potentially leading to a flawed self-assessment and a violation of application requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should always prioritize honesty and adherence to the specific legal requirements of the jurisdiction. The decision-making process should involve 1. Thoroughly reading and understanding all application instructions and relevant statutes, in this case, Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 251. 2. Answering all questions on the application truthfully and completely. 3. Providing any requested supporting documentation or explanations. 4. If unsure about the interpretation of a law or its application to a specific circumstance, seeking clarification through official channels or consulting with legal counsel specializing in firearms law. Question 17. The analysis reveals that an applicant for a concealed handgun permit in Maine has a past arrest for a misdemeanor offense that was subsequently dismissed by the court. When completing the permit application, which approach best reflects the applicant's obligation to provide accurate and complete information regarding their history? Option A. State that there are no arrests on their record as the dismissed charge was not a conviction. Option B. Provide a general statement about having no significant legal issues without detailing the dismissed arrest. Option C. Only disclose arrests that resulted in a conviction, as dismissed charges are not relevant. Option D. Disclose the arrest and its dismissal, providing any requested documentation. The correct answer is D. Disclose the arrest and its dismissal, providing any requested documentation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate the nuanced requirements of Maine's concealed handgun permit law, specifically concerning the definition of good moral character and the potential impact of past conduct on current eligibility. The applicant must accurately represent their history and understand how past legal issues might be interpreted by the permitting authority. Careful judgment is required to ensure full disclosure and avoid misrepresentation, which could lead to denial or revocation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the applicant providing a complete and truthful account of their past legal interactions, including any arrests, regardless of whether they resulted in a conviction or were later dismissed. This approach aligns with Maine Revised Statutes Title 25, Chapter 251, Section 2002, which outlines the criteria for permit issuance. While the statute doesn't explicitly define good moral character in exhaustive detail, the permitting authority is tasked with assessing an applicant's overall suitability. Full disclosure allows the authority to make an informed decision based on all relevant facts, demonstrating honesty and a willingness to comply with the spirit of the law. This proactive transparency is crucial for establishing credibility. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to only disclose arrests that led to convictions, omitting any arrests that were dismissed or resulted in acquittals. This failure to disclose all relevant interactions with law enforcement misrepresents the applicant's history and can be interpreted as an attempt to conceal information, directly contravening the expectation of honesty in the application process. Permitting authority has the right to consider all interactions with law enforcement when assessing an applicant's character and suitability. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because an arrest did not result in a conviction, it is irrelevant and need not be mentioned. This overlooks the permitting authority's discretion to consider the circumstances surrounding any arrest, even if it did not lead to a formal conviction. When evaluating an applicant's overall character and judgment, Maine law emphasizes a comprehensive review of an applicant's background. A third incorrect approach is to provide vague or misleading information about past legal issues, hoping to avoid scrutiny. This deliberate ambiguity is a form of misrepresentation and undermines the integrity of the application process. The law requires clear and truthful answers to all questions on the application. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a framework of complete transparency and honest self-assessment. This involves thoroughly reviewing all past interactions with the legal system, understanding that the permitting authority has broad discretion in evaluating character. When in doubt about what to disclose, it is always safer and more ethical to err on the side of full disclosure. Consulting with legal counsel experienced in firearms law in Maine can also provide valuable guidance in navigating complex disclosure requirements. Question 18. Comparative studies suggest that applicants for concealed handgun permits often face challenges in accurately reporting their past interactions with law enforcement. A resident of Maine is completing an application for a concealed handgun permit and has a past arrest for a misdemeanor offense that did not result in a conviction and was subsequently expunged from their record. Considering Maine's concealed handgun permit regulations, which of the following approaches best reflects the required disclosure and ethical obligations? Option A. Omit the arrest from the application, believing that since it did not result in a conviction and was expunged, it is no longer relevant. Option B. Fully disclose the arrest and the fact that it was expunged, providing any requested documentation. Option C. Disclose only the fact that the applicant has been convicted of a crime, and since this was not a conviction, it does not need to be reported. Option D. Only disclose the arrest if it resulted in a conviction, as expunged records are considered irrelevant for permit applications. The correct answer is B. Fully disclose the arrest and the fact that it was expunged, providing any requested documentation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Maine resident applying for a concealed handgun permit. The challenge lies in accurately and truthfully disclosing all relevant information on the application, particularly concerning past interactions with law enforcement, even if the applicant believes the outcome was favorable or the incident minor. Failure to do so can lead to denial of the permit and potential legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to understand the scope of what constitutes a disqualifying event under Maine law and to ensure complete transparency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and honest disclosure of all past arrests, charges, and convictions, regardless of whether they resulted in a conviction or were later expunged. This approach aligns with the principle of candor required by the application process and Maine's concealed handgun permit laws. Specifically, Maine law requires applicants to disclose any history of being arrested, charged, or convicted of a crime. Even if an arrest did not lead to a conviction, or if the record was expunged, the application process often requires disclosure of the event itself. This ensures that the licensing authority can conduct a comprehensive review to determine eligibility. The ethical obligation is to provide truthful information to the licensing authority, allowing them to make an informed decision based on all relevant facts. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to omit any mention of an arrest if the applicant believes it was minor or did not result in a conviction. This is a regulatory failure because Maine law generally requires disclosure of arrests, not just convictions. Licensing authority needs to be aware of all interactions with law enforcement to assess an applicant's suitability. Ethically, this constitutes a lack of candor. Another incorrect approach is to only disclose arrests that resulted in a conviction, assuming that expunged records are irrelevant. This is a regulatory failure, as expungement does not necessarily erase the fact that an arrest or charge occurred, and Maine law may still require disclosure of the underlying event. Ethically, this misrepresents the applicant's history. A third incorrect approach is to interpret convicted of a crime narrowly to only include felony convictions, thus omitting any misdemeanor arrests or charges. This is a regulatory failure because Maine's concealed handgun permit laws often encompass a broader range of offenses and interactions with law enforcement than just felony convictions. Ethically, this is a deliberate omission of potentially disqualifying information. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach permit applications with a mindset of full transparency. The decision-making framework involves 1. Understanding the specific disclosure requirements of the relevant jurisdiction, Maine in this case. 2. Reviewing one's personal history for any events that might fall under these disclosure requirements, including arrests, charges, and convictions, regardless of outcome or expungement status. 3. Consulting with legal counsel if there is any ambiguity about what needs to be disclosed. 4. Completing the application truthfully and completely, erring on the side of disclosure when in doubt. Question 19. The investigation demonstrates that a Maine concealed handgun permit holder, while attending a social event, entered a restaurant that also serves alcoholic beverages. The permit holder was not consuming alcohol and had no intention of doing so, believing their responsible behavior negated any potential violation. Which of the following actions best reflects adherence to Maine's concealed handgun permit regulations? Option A. The permit holder should refrain from entering the establishment due to the presence of alcohol service, regardless of their personal consumption. Option B. The permit holder could carry their concealed handgun as long as it was not visible to others. Option C. The permit holder was within their rights to carry as long as they were not consuming alcohol and were acting responsibly. Option D. The permit holder should have inquired with the establishment's management about their policy on concealed carry before entering. The correct answer is A. The permit holder should have refrained from entering the establishment due to the presence of alcohol service, regardless of their personal consumption. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a situation where a permit holder's actions could potentially violate Maine's concealed handgun laws, specifically concerning the lawful carrying of a firearm in public. The professional challenge lies in interpreting the nuances of Maine statutes regarding carrying firearms in places where alcohol is served, and understanding the permit holder's responsibility to be aware of and comply with these restrictions. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between lawful possession and unlawful carrying under specific circumstances. The best approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Maine Revised Statutes Title 17, Chapter 51, specifically concerning the prohibition of carrying a concealed handgun in establishments that serve alcohol. This approach recognizes that a concealed handgun permit does not grant an unrestricted right to carry a firearm in all locations. Maine law explicitly restricts carrying in such establishments, and a permit holder is expected to know and follow these restrictions. The ethical and legal imperative is to prioritize public safety and compliance with the law, which means refraining from carrying a concealed handgun into a bar, even if the permit holder believes they are not consuming alcohol and are acting responsibly. An incorrect approach would be to assume that because the permit holder is not consuming alcohol, the prohibition does not apply. This misinterprets the statute, which focuses on the nature of the establishment itself, not solely the individual's behavior within it. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on a vague personal interpretation of responsible carrying, without consulting the specific legal prohibitions outlined in Maine law. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the legal obligations associated with holding a concealed handgun permit. Finally, an approach that prioritizes personal convenience or perceived right over explicit legal restrictions would be ethically and legally unsound, as it undermines the regulatory framework designed to balance firearm rights with public safety. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of all applicable state laws and regulations. When faced with a situation where the legality of carrying a firearm is uncertain, the default professional action should be to err on the side of caution and seek clarification or abstain from carrying the firearm in that specific context until absolute certainty of legality is achieved. This involves proactive research of statutes, understanding the scope of permits, and recognizing that permits are conditional privileges, not absolute rights. Question 20. Analysis of the following scenario requires a concealed handgun permit applicant in Maine to accurately report their total ammunition. The applicant possesses one semi-automatic pistol with 3 magazines, each capable of holding a maximum of 10 rounds, and one revolver that holds 6 rounds. The applicant has 10 rounds loaded in each of the 3 magazines for the semi-automatic pistol, and 6 rounds loaded in the revolver. What is the total number of rounds the applicant possesses for these firearms? Option A, 30 rounds. Option B, 16 rounds. Option C, 36 rounds. Option D, 9 rounds. The correct answer is C, 36 rounds. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to accurately calculate the total number of rounds they possess across multiple firearms, while also considering Maine's specific regulations regarding magazine capacity. Miscalculation could lead to an inaccurate declaration on the permit application, potentially violating state law and impacting the integrity of the permitting process. The applicant must demonstrate attention to detail and a clear understanding of the legal requirements. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves meticulously counting all ammunition for each firearm and then summing these quantities. For the semi-automatic pistol, the applicant correctly identifies the maximum capacity of the magazines, 10 rounds, and multiplies this by the number of magazines, 3, resulting in 30 rounds. For the revolver, the applicant correctly counts the total number of rounds, 6. The total ammunition is then calculated by adding the ammunition for both firearms. 30 rounds plus 6 rounds equals 36 rounds. This method directly addresses the requirement to declare total ammunition and adheres to Maine's understanding of magazine capacity for semi-automatic firearms. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves simply adding the number of magazines for the semi-automatic pistol to the rounds in the revolver. 3 plus 6 equals 9 rounds. This fails to account for the ammunition loaded into each magazine and the total number of rounds available for the semi-automatic firearm, leading to a significant undercount. Another incorrect approach is to only count the rounds in one magazine for the semi-automatic pistol and add it to the revolver's rounds. 10 plus 6 equals 16 rounds. This ignores the additional magazines and the ammunition they contain, again resulting in an inaccurate declaration. A further incorrect approach is to sum the capacity of all magazines for the semi-automatic pistol and then add the capacity of the revolver cylinder, without considering the actual number of rounds possessed. 10 rounds / magazine * 3 magazines plus 6 rounds / cylinder equals 36 rounds. But this is a calculation of potential capacity, not actual possession if the applicant doesn't have that many rounds. This approach, while coincidentally reaching the correct total in this specific instance, is flawed because it focuses on maximum potential capacity rather than actual possession, which is what the application requires. If the applicant had fewer rounds than the total capacity, this method would still yield the maximum capacity and not the actual number of rounds possessed. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize accuracy and adherence to legal requirements. When dealing with permit applications that require specific numerical declarations, a systematic and verifiable counting method is essential. This involves breaking down the calculation by firearm and then by ammunition source, e.g., magazine cylinders, ensuring each component is accounted for. In situations involving magazine capacity, understanding the legal definition of capacity within the relevant jurisdiction, Maine, in this case, is paramount. If there is any ambiguity, seeking clarification from the issuing authority is the most responsible course of action.